She didn't know it at the time, but this would be the final night of her life. 19-year-old Maple Batalia was everything her friends described her to be: bright, bubbly, and full of promise. That evening, she was at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, surrounded by classmates, her laughter carrying across the library as she studied late into the night. It was a normal night for her. Notes spread out on the table, a cup of coffee nearby. The easy comfort of being with people who loved her. But outside the glow of the library lights, someone else was watching. Someone who didn't see Maple as the talented student or aspiring actress that everyone admired. To him, she wasn't a young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor or a daughter who filled her family's home with warmth. He saw her as something else entirely, something to control, something he couldn't let go of. As the hours ticked by, Maple remained unaware of the shadow following her. Her final hours were filled with joy, but the night itself was closing in. And then, silence shattered. Calls began pouring into the police station. Gunshots, 7, maybe more, echoed through the parking lot. Witnesses scrambled for cover, voices trembling as they dialed 911. Within minutes, police officers were racing to the scene. The first calls hit dispatch at 10:04 p.m. One man's voice trembled as he told operators, "I just heard gunshots, at least 7. Seconds later, more calls flooded in. Students hiding behind cars, residents in nearby apartments, everyone said the same thing. A burst of gunfire had erupted inside the campus parking structure. Sergeant Kevin Jeffrey was among the first to respond. He sped toward the 3rd floor of the garage where terrified witnesses pointed. There, between 2 parked vehicles, he saw a young woman lying in a pool of blood. It was Maple. She had been shot 3 times. Deep stab wounds marked the back of her head. Blood stained the ground around her. Against all odds, Maple was still breathing, barely clinging to life. Officers immediately called for paramedics, who fought desperately to stabilize her. Time was slipping away, but every second mattered. As Maple was rushed toward the nearest hospital, investigators began scouring the scene. A large knife lay nearby, slick with blood, but carefully wiped clean of fingerprints. A single bullet casing was recovered, but the gun itself had vanished. Her wallet and student ID were found close to her body, confirming her identity. Back at the hospital, doctors worked through the night, but the damage was catastrophic. Hours later, at 9:07 p.m., Maple's family received the words no parent should ever hear. Their daughter was gone. Her father collapsed in grief. Her mother, overcome with rage and despair, pressed her forehead to the officer delivering the news and screamed, "Bring me vengeance." The loss shattered them. Maple had been the jewel of their lives, a daughter whose future stretched wide open. In one night, everything was stolen. News spread quickly across the community. The murder of a 19-year-old student on campus sent shockwaves through the city. Reporters swarmed the hospital, and soon, Maple's face was on every screen, her name on every front page. But for investigators, grief had to give way to answers. Someone had executed this attack with precision. Someone had stalked Maple, waited for the perfect moment, and struck. And if they were bold enough to murder her on a university campus, police feared this wasn't the end. The investigation had only just begun. Before detectives could chase leads, the world needed to understand who had been lost. Maple Batalia wasn't just another student on campus. She was extraordinary. A straight-A achiever, she was determined to become a doctor, spending long hours buried in textbooks, chasing a future in medicine. But Maple's ambitions didn't stop there. She had a love for performing, already stepping into the world of acting while balancing her studies. By 17, she had appeared in commercials, and by 19, she'd landed small roles in television and film, including Diary of a Wimpy Kid and The Secret Circle. Friends remembered her as vibrant, someone whose laughter filled every room. Family described her as their brightest jewel, a daughter who never gave them a reason to worry. Her future was limitless until it was cut short. For investigators, this wasn't just a case file. This was about justice for a girl who should have had decades ahead of her. And they knew the answers might be hidden in the cameras watching that night. The crime scene left investigators with little to go on. A bloody knife wiped clean, a single shell casing, and a victim who could no longer speak for herself. If they were going to find Maple's killer, they would need eyes. And luckily, the university campus had plenty. Simon Fraser University was equipped with nearly 100 security cameras, 32 of them covering the parking structures alone. For detectives, that meant hundreds of hours of footage to comb through. But it also meant hope. Somewhere, hidden in those recordings, could be the story of Maple's final night. The first step was establishing her timeline. Investigators pulled footage from a camera near the library entrance. They scanned through the late evening hours, expecting to see Maple arrive around 9:30 p.m. She was easy to recognize. Dark jacket, white sandals, her hair tied back. But as minutes turned into hours on the tape, there was no sign of her. That raised immediate questions. Had she entered from a different route? Had the camera missed her? The absence was strange enough that detectives broadened their search. Switching angles, they checked a camera covering the pathway from the parking lot to the library. At 10:22 p.m., two dark-haired girls came into frame, heading toward the elevator. One of them, white sandals, dark jacket, looked exactly like Maple. But the video was blurry, and investigators couldn't be certain. It wasn't enough to stand in court, and they needed more. So they moved to the interior library cameras. Finally, a breakthrough. The footage showed Maple clearly, laughing, smiling, surrounded by friends. She looked carefree, completely unaware of the danger stalking her outside. Detectives leaned in, hoping to track her every step. But then, the camera swung away. A preset rotation sent the lens panning across the library floor. And when it turned back, Maple was gone. Investigators were furious. It almost felt like someone had sabotaged the feed, deliberately robbing them of answers. But the truth was more frustrating. It was just bad luck, an automated camera that turned at the worst possible moment. Determined not to lose her trail, detectives pulled footage from the library exit. At 10:01 p.m., Maple appeared again, this time walking with three young men. They moved calmly, nothing about them suggesting the violence that was about to unfold. From there, police followed them to another camera pointed toward the parking lot. Just minutes later, Maple's life would be cut short. Investigators needed this footage to reveal who was with her at that critical moment. But once again, fate intervened. The street camera overlooking the parking lot zoomed out, its automated movement shifting away right as Maple and the three men stepped into frame. By the time it returned, the parking lot was empty. Maple was already fighting for her life on the ground, and the killer had vanished. The cameras had given detectives pieces of the puzzle, but none that fit together. To make sense of them, they needed to identify the young men walking with Maple. And one name would soon surface, a name that pulled investigators deeper into the mystery. Dylan Dillon, an old friend from high school, and one of the last people to see her alive. With hours of footage reviewed and still no clear image of Maple's killer, frustration was mounting inside the investigation room. Cameras had caught Maple laughing in the library and leaving with friends. But at the moment she needed to be seen most, the angles failed. Detectives were left with more questions than answers. But then, one officer spotted something unusual. On footage from a street camera outside campus, a white sports car appeared, speeding away at a dangerously high pace. The timestamp read 10:04 p.m., the exact moment dispatchers were flooded with 911 calls about gunshots. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Investigators froze the frame. The vehicle was clearly a Dodge Charger, its headlights cutting through the night. But there was a problem. The car was moving so fast, the license plate was nothing more than a blur. They had a make and model, but not an owner. Determined to chase the lead, detectives went back through earlier footage from the university. Hours before the murder, at 8:07 p.m., they spotted it again, the same Dodge Charger pulling into the campus parking lot. The silhouette matched perfectly. Whoever was driving that car hadn't just been passing by. They had been watching, waiting, circling like a predator. The theory quickly formed. Maple hadn't been the victim of random violence. Someone had come to that campus with one purpose: to hunt her. Now the investigation had focus. Detectives shifted resources toward tracking the Charger. How many white Dodge Chargers were even registered in the province? The answer was surprising. Very few. Most belonged not to private owners, but to rental agencies. That revelation sent investigators racing to local rental offices. If the car was rented, there would be a paper trail, a name that could tie directly back to the killer. Meanwhile, the community reeled. News of Maple's death had spread across the city, and the grief was overwhelming. Hundreds attended vigils and memorial services, holding candles in silence. Strangers who had never met Maple mourned as if she were their own sister or daughter. The tragedy of a promising 19-year-old cut down in her prime was impossible to ignore. But inside the investigation, detectives kept circling back to the Charger. The timing, the location, the way it appeared just before Maple entered the library. It was more than coincidence. Someone in that car had been shadowing her movements the entire evening. Then came the breakthrough. At one rental agency, records showed that a white Dodge Charger had been rented on the very day Maple was killed. And surveillance footage from that agency confirmed it. Two young men walking in together, signing paperwork, waiting as the car was pulled around. One of them matched the description of a student named Gersamar Gary Betty. But Betty wasn't alone. Standing beside him was another man, someone who would change the course of the investigation forever. Maple knew him. She had once loved him, her ex-boyfriend. And suddenly, the case shifted from a mystery to something far darker. A story of obsession, betrayal, and rage. When investigators confirmed that Maple's ex-boyfriend, Gary Dollywall, was linked to the white Dodge Charger, the puzzle pieces suddenly began to make sense. What had seemed like a random, calculated ambush now looked like something more personal, something fueled by obsession. Gary and Maple's relationship had started like many others. At first, he seemed charming, attentive, and supportive. To Maple's family, he appeared to be a good match, someone who made her happy. But that impression didn't last long. Gary's charm hid darker traits: jealousy, possessiveness, and a need for control. When Maple discovered he had cheated, she ended the relationship. For her, it was the natural choice to move forward. For him, it was unthinkable. He couldn't accept being left behind. Detectives began digging into his past, and soon another troubling detail surfaced. Just days before the murder, Gary had confronted Maple at a Tim Hortons cafe. Surveillance footage showed Maple sitting with her friend Dylan when Gary stormed in. His rage was immediate. Without warning, he swung at Dylan, starting a fight in the middle of the cafe. The confrontation ended with Maple leading Gary outside, climbing into his car, and leaving with him. To investigators, that footage was chilling. It showed exactly what they feared: a young man consumed by jealousy, unwilling to let Maple move on, and increasingly aggressive. Maple's friends later told police how shaken she had been after that encounter. One even begged her to seek a restraining order, warning her that Gary's anger was dangerous. Maple had brushed it off, insisting she could handle it. But in reality, the situation was escalating faster than anyone imagined. For police, the motive was becoming clear. Gary wasn't just hurt. He was enraged. He believed Maple belonged to him, and the thought of her with someone else drove him to violence. His jealousy wasn't just an emotion, it was a weapon. Now, paired with the evidence of the Dodge Charger rental, investigators could see how carefully he had plotted his next move. He had an accomplice, Gursamar Betty, who rented the car in his name. He had a weapon, both a knife and a gun, and most chilling of all, he had the patience to wait for hours in that parking lot until the moment Maple was alone. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Police needed undeniable proof tying Gary directly to the attack. They needed to show that he wasn't just a jealous ex, but a cold-blooded killer who had stalked Maple and struck when no one else was watching. As detectives pressed forward, they found themselves in a race against time. Gary already knew how to hide in the shadows, and without stronger evidence, there was a chance he might slip through their fingers entirely. The investigation now entered its most critical stage. The cameras had led them to Gary Dollywall, but the question was, could they find the proof to put him away? With Gary Dollywall now at the center of suspicion, investigators doubled their efforts to lock him in with hard evidence. The white Dodge Charger was their strongest lead. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed something undeniable. That breakthrough came from forensics. When specialists combed through the vehicle, they discovered a single shell casing lodged under the hood. Ballistic tests confirmed it matched the caliber of the bullets that struck Maple. It was a direct connection. Whoever pulled the trigger had been inside that car. Detectives then returned to the rental agency footage. Frame by frame, they confirmed what they already suspected. Gursamar Betty had signed the paperwork, but Gary was right there with him. Surveillance even caught them waiting together outside as the car was brought around. For police, it was the proof they needed. Gary hadn't just been jealous. He had planned Maple's death. Armed with this evidence, investigators brought Betty in for questioning. They hoped he might turn on Gary, but Betty stayed silent, refusing to give them anything. Still, his loyalty wouldn't be enough to protect them. Soon after, both men were arrested. The weight of the case was finally coming down on Gary Dollywall, the man Maple had once loved. As the case moved forward, more details surfaced. Gary had stalked Maple for hours that night, circling the campus in the Charger, waiting for her to be alone. The rage he carried from their breakup had grown into something darker, something deadly. For Maple's family, the arrests brought relief, but it wasn't closure. They had lost their daughter forever. For detectives, it was the final confirmation of what they had suspected all along. Maple's death wasn't random. It was the result of one man's obsession and his refusal to let her go. But the story wasn't over. In the interrogation room, Gary's silence would eventually break, and when it did, the truth of Maple's final moments would be revealed in chilling detail. With both men in custody, detectives pressed for answers. At first, Gary Dollywall refused to speak, but the weight of evidence was crushing. Eventually, he broke. In a chilling confession, Gary admitted what investigators had already pieced together. He had never accepted Maple's decision to leave him. Jealousy consumed him, especially after seeing her with Dylan just days earlier. To him, Maple wasn't free to move on. She was his possession. Fueled by rage, Gary armed himself with a gun and a knife. With Betty's help, he rented the Dodge Charger, then stalked Maple's movements across campus. For 4 hours he waited, circling, watching, until she was alone in the dimly lit parking structure. That was when he attacked, shooting her, then stabbing her in the head to make sure she wouldn't survive. In court, Betty was convicted as an accomplice and served less than 2 years in prison. Gary received life without parole, though his sentence was later reduced to second-degree murder, making him eligible for release after 21 years. For Maple's family, it felt like justice had been compromised. The trial ended, but the pain never did. For Maple's family, every day was a reminder of the future stolen from them. Her mother described the loss as losing the most precious jewel of her life. Her father admitted there was no peace because Maple was still gone. Her father admitted there was no peace because Maple was still gone. Friends remembered her brilliance, her laughter, and her dreams of becoming a doctor. To the community, she became a symbol of what jealousy and violence can destroy. Though courts delivered sentences, Maple's story stands as a warning and as a memory of a life filled with promise, cut short before it could truly begin. Justice, her family says, may have come on paper, but for them, Maple's absence is a wound that will never heal. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.